Hello, good morning. At least it's morning. Oh no, it's not. It's afternoon. I've immediately messed that one up, Steve.
No one will know. No one will know.
Nobody know. Yeah, it's definitely the morning here when we're recording. Good morning and welcome to November's issue of Cyber Threats Exposed. As ever,
this message is brought to you by BSL IT, a proud with secure partner. BSL IT is a young and dynamic IT solutions and product provider. Based in the English Midlands, they offer the best care, service and pricing possible.
I'm your host, Tim, and I'm joined by Steve.
Hey there.
And we're going to talk to you about everything we thought was relevant in the realm of cyber security and cyber threats for the month of November. So without further ado, should we just plow straight into our kind of top story? And I'll hand over to you here, Steve.
Yeah, sure thing. So kind of the top one, probably the thing that's going to be most impactful, maybe not super cool and interesting, but impactful, is that Microsoft have released or announced the release of a huge pile of new tools and things. So part of that's Windows 2025, next big Windows version. And that adds in many new things. The ability to do many new things. And some of it's really good. So you can actually block NTLM authentication. And considering just like constant stream of NTLM hash harvesting, relay, etc., stuff that's been going on recently, that's good. You can rate limit SMB authentication finally. So brute forces become a lot less useful. And also there's doing SMB over quick, which is like a kind of application VPN tunnel type thing. So that's good that you've got all these extra kind of security things in there. However, part of the issue is for me that some of them or a lot of them aren't enabled by default. So it's, is it more security or just more menu options that we're going to get from this? I think it gives the possibility of making something more secure. But then there's also the possibility people just assume that they're more secure. On the kind of cloud side of the house, they announced a lot of new kind of cloud things and tools. So kind of a browser secure shared password service. So the people who are using the password don't actually have access to it. So it's kind of centrally managed. Actual kind of enforcement of security configurations for whoever's using your cloud services, things like this, an AI patching tool. I don't know why you need an AI patching tool, but an AI patching tool, and a few other things. And they all sound like they could be good or useful. They also do, again, mean, more complexity. So I'm kind of on the fence as to whether it's a good thing or not, like it is. And if you've got the time and knowledge to implement them all, then I can't see how that would be a bad thing. But we know there's a lot of people who don't have time, the time to do and the time to learn while also running at full pelt.
So if all of these are implemented, as they say on the tin, this will make you kind of more secure. However, this is something that's probably limited to the organizations who have dedicated IT and IT security and secure environment teams. So
exactly.
perhaps the mid-market adds complexity, not security. I think what's interesting for me is, more security features does not necessarily mean more security, where there's still quite a lot of basics that are being kind of leveraged by attackers. So still the use of kind of earlier iterations of NTLM, which is a largely deprecated security protocol, or the ability to brute force, which is a relatively kind of low sophistication way of just trying to guess credentials. And the solutions to that aren't very complex, and we know what they are. So while this kind of low hanging fruit is still available, adding more features at the top of the tree isn't going to do an awful lot to an awful lot of people. That would be the cynical view. However, I've actually been quite pleased. The reason we're kind of talking about Microsoft is they're such a monolithic organization, right? And they are intrinsically linked to the enterprise security of large organizations to small organizations. But the reason why I think there is a reason to be optimistic is because of this kind of paradigm shift within Microsoft, where security is now put, or they kind of claim, and there's no real reason to doubt this, but security is put at the forefront of everything they do. Every employee across Microsoft has kind of security-related objectives, and they're really trying to change this culture into putting security first, which is really, really, really important. Obviously, it's really important to us because it's what we do, what we live and breathe. So there is a reason to think this is all positive, right?
Yep, definitely. I mean, I'd rather see, attempts being made to move in the right direction rather than just brushing under the carpet or something. So, it is a good thing. And as you say, like, it's a huge chunk of kind of every IT market is in Microsoft's hands.
The downside to this, it is a relatively boring story, right? We're opening a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
We're opening a podcast promising kind of cyber threats and, what's going on in November with just some kind of promises by Microsoft. And, it's not a cyber threat, right? Microsoft aren't a threat, but this is really important. And the reason it's at the top is because, as I noted already, Microsoft are really heavily targeted. Not only that, but the Microsoft kind of security features are also really, really heavily targeted. If you look at things like Mark of the Web, there are threat actors out there that are deliberately trying to bypass Mark of the Web. That's because it's such an effective tool. But the issue can be is when kind of security functionality is, or other functionality is kind of used against an organization. So if we take something like Microsoft Recall, for example, right, it didn't take organizations long to realize there was some pretty significant kind of privacy implications there. So this is something that's really going to impact the threat landscape, and it's an economy, right? There's going to be positives and negatives, and we just have to hope that it comes out net positive.
Yeah, and it is boring, but like, the cutting edge of cybersecurity is still telling people to use strong passwords and not to click on links, while understanding that people inherently do not want strong passwords and they do want to click on links. It's not particularly cool, but it's a fact.
Well, this is another really good point, and it's that kind of back to human nature. And we were having this conversation earlier, weren't we? With new technologies such as kind of, let's take the cloud for an example. If we go back kind of 10 years, people knew that they needed a strong password and multi-factor authentication was coming in, and they knew not to kind of, expose your password in the clear. And now we've kind of come a certain way on this journey, and we've got kind of decent MFA, and we've got password managers and all of this kind of stuff. And, I've mentioned it before, I think the password model is completely broken, but we have kind of come we've come a certain amount of distance on this maturity journey. But then if you look at like cloud, and we're back to square one again, there's people putting kind of secrets in clear, and it's because human nature kicks in, really. So this is the other issue with any kind of technology development. It's nothing to do with Microsoft really, but once we get this new kind of architecture or operating system and the complexity is hidden from the users, human nature will kick in and an override, and bad practice will come forward. So in that sense, it's less about more security features, and it's more about actually making sure that the default is easy and positive.
And speaking of it being, human nature and the easy way of doing things, is kind of a good segue into software supply chain attacks.
Oh yeah, I mean this has been a trend. This is something we've seen over the last year, really, and it's something we're quite concerned about. So it's software supply chain attacks. Often supply chain attack is you compromise something in order to get further down their customer chain or whatever. A lot of the stuff that's been happening, or it's been reported rather this month, has been a really simple kind of create a software package, give it a name that's a bit like the name of a package people want, and upload it to a repository like PyPy or NPM. It's typo squatting, really. But people, type, like
to import these packages into wherever they're putting them without necessarily checking what it is that they're getting. So, for example, there's a package that was named Fabrice, so fabric with an E, which was typo squatting the common PyPy package fabric. And that was downloaded 37,000 times, which is a lot for such a very simplistic, low-effort attack.
What does it do?
It steals AWS credentials. I mean, a bit of effort in that it will steal credentials from both Linux and Windows, although it's just a simple script to pull those out once it's executed. But yeah, 37,000 times that was downloaded. There's a couple of others that between them add up to I think another kind of 12 or 13,000 at least. So you got about 50,000 downloads of packages from a couple of different places, affecting multiple OSs. So with Windows, Linux, and Mac OS payloads, doing things like stealing AWS credentials or stealing random private keys or crypto wallets or whatever else. Super low effort, but that's quite an impact,
It's super high impact, isn't it? You've got tens of thousands of secrets that have been stolen, and the relatively low chance, frankly, that organizations would have detected this.
Yeah, and bearing in mind that's the number of downloads that have come from here. I mean, if you're then bundling up, software as well, if it's at the beginning of a software supply chain, they get bundled up and pushed down, then it could be even more in the end.
So I guess I want to kind of go into a little bit why this is so kind of concerning, and it does link to the point that I made around the Microsoft things, right? With new and different kind of ways of doing things, we as humans revert to kind of human nature, and all of the progress we made in previous architectures and understanding on what we should and shouldn't do kind of seems to go out the window for no real good reason. So let's be really clear about this. If you download a software package, right, you are executing code on your machine. That's the long and short of it.
Yeah.
So we probably are aware now that you should not download executables from the internet and double click them, right? Many organizations will have security processes in place that prevent that from happening. It's what is called an application allow listing, for example. Right? You cannot just download arbitrary code from a strange place on the internet that you don't know anything about.
Unless you're a developer.
And it's because it's not down, it's not seen as the same way, right? You just hit import. So the difference is really you're not downloading a full packaged executable, you're downloading an element or a kind of software library that goes into the wider code you are doing, but you don't know how it runs, you don't know what it looks like. You don't know the malicious elements, you don't know if it's been tested. There's been some kind of examples of organization or of actors who kind of put fake kind of software fixes in forums and just include these malicious libraries. You don't really know what you're downloading and running. So why is it kind of acceptable to do this as a software developer who probably has elevated permissions versus anybody trying to download and run some code from the internet? There's a real cognitive dissonance here for me. And again, we are back to kind of square one in terms of how we kind of treat exactly the same kind of issue. And it's a real problem. If you ask me, and let's also kind of bear in mind that software kind of build environments are quite often the crown jewels for an organization, right? If somebody can infiltrate your build process, then that's a pretty existential threat to
huge,
your organization. Look at SolarWinds. So maybe
still
the theft of keys is relatively low impact in the short term, and there's no immediate feedback loop, which is why this isn't maybe being treated as seriously as I think it should.
I'm moving on
to another kind of massive problem, right? This is
We'll solve all of these by the end of the podcast, I'm sure.
I feel like I'm going to need to get a bit more optimistic. I need to have a minute and just calm myself down, because I feel like I've been on a soapbox and this is the Christmas edition of the podcast. We don't want to be so doom and gloom. This is supposed to be happy and jolly.
Well, I mean, there is some actual positive news in the AI arena later on.
All right,
so don't worry.
I look forward to that.
There's some positivity for sure.
Okay.
And this isn't really more negative. It's just a continued negative in a way. So network appliance vulnerabilities, mass exploitation, that again, still. So there was Fortinet's FortiGate FortiManager vulnerability, which a lot of times I end up rolling into a Forti vulnerability, but no. Now, this was disclosed in October as being exploited as early as June as a 0-day. But it's come back round again because this month it was found out that you could actually exploit it silently without generating the IOCs that Fortinet had released for people to detect. And some additional vulnerabilities were identified, which allowed authenticated or unauthenticated control of FortiManagers by FortiGate devices. It's all gotten a bit complicated and messy because, it has. There's a couple of vulnerabilities. There's a couple of CVEs. There's a patch which may or may not work. There's a few things like this. So it's been a bit of a mess on that front. The important thing really is don't expose your management interfaces and your FortiManager, your management devices to the internet. There's not really any need to do that.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, we've had Palo Alto. So Palo Alto's PAN-OS management interface has had a couple of vulnerabilities, which means if the management interface is open to the internet, you can exploit a chain to get unauthenticated remote code execution as a root, which is kind of as bad as it gets. But the good thing in this one is that at least Palo Alto, there was kind of a rumor that something was exploitable in their management interfaces, and they put out a notification to customers saying, "Hey, we've heard rumors. This might be it. We are investigating." They didn't wait until they had confirmed it. They told people, "Hey," because the mitigation is the obvious easy thing of just don't point it at the internet,
Yeah.
This ends toward internet.
That's positive, right? I think that's good behavior,
exactly.
and pleased to see Palo Alto do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think just from my point of view, I think there was probably a bit of a concerted effort into management interfaces in general. We hadn't really had any management interface vulnerabilities, and then like London buses, and many came along at once.
Yeah. It has been interesting, really, seeing these kind of keep coming and how they kind of ping around the different vendors. There's obviously a lot of effort being put in from a lot of places, both security researchers and attackers and, nation states, looking at this because they are so widespread, and there's been a lot of luck already in finding things. So,
these two aren't even the only kind of firewall that's been under active exploitation en masse, right? These are just the kind of the manager section we're putting in.
Yeah, exactly.
So just a reminder, if one were needed, to organizations that, your firewall is a pretty hot target for adversaries, and if you've got it down as a security control and don't have anything kind of monitoring that, making sure your logs are good enough, or then
boy, we should have that. We should really have that whole pattern down by now, shouldn't we? Just for each month, we'll just record it and we'll just get Craig to tack it on at the beginning every month.
Yeah,
and then
just
job done.
There's another campaign against the firewall. I think this is actually quite a nice couple of stories in terms of maybe a theme for 2024. To be honest, so we were discussing for the context of the listener, we were kind of discussing around, looking at maybe summing up the entire year and what are the trends and the themes. And probably for me, at least two of those would be software supply chain and network appliance vulnerabilities over 2024. I think that's really dictated a lot of the news.
Yeah, they're not going away yet, but I think that the positive thing is that there's a lot of scrutiny, and that's what is needed in those cases. However, on to better things like ransomware.
Ransomware. You mean the ransomware that posted the most victims in history ever, apart from the Move It campaign?
Yeah, that one.
Good, nice, and positive.
Yeah. So, as Tim's rather spoiled there, it was the second highest monthly total ever this month in number of victims posted to leak sites. There's a large rise, like month-on-month rise as well, so an extra 114 victims compared to last month. Now, a big part of that is Akira. So they posted 10 last month and 73 this month. So more than half of that bump this month was Akira on their own. Now, as well as that, so Akira kind of second place over 73. Ransom Hub are floating around 100, I think, victims this month, and they've really kind of sort of started to rule the roost a bit on numbers and
definitely, yeah,
impact. However, there's also a new group called SafePay who posted 32 victims, which is quite a lot for a new group. Obviously, new brand, not necessarily and very unlikely to be new actors or new people behind it.
Yeah.
32 victims. But SafePay, their victims were mostly small business. Akira, their victims were mostly, if not entirely, small, medium enterprises. So it could be that while we've got big numbers, it may be smaller organizations falling victim, which while it's still bad for the organizations in question, it's better, it's a less impact than if a massive organization does fall victim.
Well, I mean, maybe not for the victims. I think the Akira, right? We spoke maybe last podcast or the podcast before around kind of smash and grab attacks on Sonic Wall network appliances. We think the rise in Akira is due to the backlog of victims associated with that campaign.
Yeah.
So that explains why it's so high.
And that is something that they have been having success with the entire year.
Yeah. The other
Sonic Wall VPNs and Akira have been hand in hand for a while.
Victim numbers posted to leak sites. We should do this disclaimer every time we speak about them, right? So if they rise, there is also an argument to suggest that that's a drop of people meeting the extortion demands of the actors, and that's why they are getting posted to. So we have to assume a relatively constant payment rate month on month to take any insight out of the victims hitting the ransomware blogs. But it's not a wild assumption, so we're relatively comfortable with that, and it's the best way we know how to interpret that data. However, numbers aren't the only metric of how severe a ransomware infection is, as you mentioned, Steve. So the Akira campaign, for example, was smash and grab. Right, they were compromising Sonic Walls, they were rushing towards kind of ESXi services, and they were encrypting them. Frankly, a lot of organizations would have been able to recover relatively easily. They may not be able to get their data back, but that kind of explains the rise as well. Smash and grabs can be less impactful for an organization. They just represent a higher return of effort for the ransomware actors than stealthily compromising and sitting quietly in a network for months on end to make sure that you get every last nook and cranny.
Yeah. There is nuance to these things. It isn't reflected necessarily in those big, or those are headline numbers really. So
I think it does look though for the end of the year that the numbers are going to be kind of much higher than they were. I think last year in 2023 numbers did drop from the median in the year towards the end. That's not happening now. We had a pretty substantial drop within in quarter three of this year, following essentially the Black Cat exit scam and Lockbit law enforcement action, which was great and definitely impacted them. But it does look like now the sector is kind of starting to recover.
Yeah,
and I think,
as you said, the whole the type of attack, I think they got pushed onto or clued into that, file transfer stuff. We've had Clio recently and whatever's going on.
Wow, yeah,
all this kind of jazz.
This is the other
Spoilers,
thing, I think. In the new year, I think we're going to have higher numbers in December as well as a result of the Clio mass exploitation that we've seen by Clop ransomware that hasn't yet hit the breach sites. So I think numbers are going to continue to rise.
Well, shall we move on from ransomware to a section that actually has some positive news?
Yes, go for it.
So AI. Now,
got to talk about AI. We should have like a jingle that kind of says, this is the AI section, and we're legally obliged to talk about AI in any kind of tech speaking engagement we do.
When you said like an AI jingle, I just thought of like, I don't know, Enya or something, or some particularly whaley, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be an audio clip somewhere of them just going like AI for a while.
We could ask AI to create an audio clip in the style of Enya to segue into this section. That would be pretty good. Let's get the producers on that.
We'll get that, exactly. And they've got nothing better to do, it's fine.
Yeah. We'll put them to work on what matters.
So AI. So Google announced that their LLM-based code fuzzer has identified and registered like 26 CVEs this month. Nice. So fuzzing is essentially putting bad data through code and intentionally trying to break it by just randomly shoving data into it to try and get an unexpected response. And you know, it's kind of what testing is. Fuzzing is doing it in an automated fashion. So really, in a way, you're putting random data in almost. There's a spectrum, but that's what I'm going to go with as my description here. So the LLM fuzzer, what it does is it tries to identify places in the code that might be vulnerable or might have, you know, flaws in them, and then it kind of shovels data through to try and trigger those flaws, and then to identify when they've been triggered, so on and so forth. So what they do in this case is they've got their LLM fuzzer they've created. They've got 272 open source code bases that they direct it at, because, you know, you need to look at the code and kind of do that identification piece. And they have identified and had attributed to them 26 CVEs. Now, that's good. That's good. My questions are, what are the false positive and false negative rates? And how much does it cost to run this model? If they identified, you know, 260 vulnerabilities, but only 26 of them existed, then that's not usable. If they, you know, identified 26, but actually there's a ton more that we know are there that they didn't find, then that's obviously also not great. And if it costs a butt ton of money to run this LLM on these huge lines of, you know,
so your
code.
concern is on the cost of finding these vulnerabilities and whether that's acceptable.
Well, the cost and effectiveness, yeah.
What would the cost be to Google there if I found this vulnerability? Right, and go for a bug bounty scheme.
Don't know. I mean, they're open source, so I don't know how much money they've got to pay bug bounties.
Yeah,
they're obviously open source foundations do pay them and so on, and there is that whole thing going on. But
wait, who's open? Google aren't open source.
No.
Who's open source? Who's open source?
Sources that are open.
Wait, you're
like
saying
OpenSSH. Oh wait, so but for example, OpenSSH is technically open, but it's also used by everybody and their dog. So
you're saying Google's fuzzer found vulnerabilities in open source software, not in its own.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Open source software, yes, not Google software.
Yeah.
Or at least they haven't said if they found it.
Well, that's a net positive. There, you could one vulnerability could.
It's a good. It is a good.
Cause a lot of trouble. Yeah.
I just have questions because that's the kind of killjoy that I am. But also,
well, Log4j was open. Log4j was open source. Steve, let's not forget the Christmas we had 3 years ago. 4.
Oh God, who knows?
Yeah. Well, no wasp. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. No. Don't take me back there. Right. OWASP. So they have released AI security guidelines and resources, which is good because people need them. So it seems. Now, so this is kind of respected, you know, industry body for security, you know, advice and guidelines, really. So they've released a guide for preparing and responding to deepfake events. They've released a guide for setting up an AI center of excellence. And they've released a guide to navigating the AI security solution landscape, which all sound like things that people who are diving into AI could do with. Really.
What does the AI security solution landscape mean?
So there are. So it's a guide. It's a guide to security solutions that can be applied when you're doing AI solutions, because those security, you know, solutions that you need for AI are very different to the security solutions you need for just plain old applications or hardware or whatever. People have to be able to submit like things through AI. It has to be able to pass big blobs of data that you've not, you don't necessarily know the contents of beforehand, all that kind of jazz. So you require a different type of security solution to deal with that. This is my understanding.
No, that makes sense. And it's positive because we're right back to where I was at the start of this podcast, where we get a new technology or a new toy that we forget all of our fundamentals, i.e. secure by design, secure by default. And we think, we must do secure by design and secure by default on Windows executables that we build. And then we go, AI, let's just throw up loads of tooling and let's get to it as quickly as we can. And I'm sure that it won't bite us in the ass. And, as we see so many times with the kind of crypto vulnerabilities that have fleeced people out of millions. So that's really good. Yeah, positive.
And the final one that I picked up on this month was that Gartner have said that a survey of theirs found that 80% of senior risk and assurance executives stated that AI-enhanced cyber attacks were the top threat that they were concerned about. And this was reported under headlines saying AI-assisted attacks are the top cyber threat. That is, of course, not what I just said. They're the highest concern for the executives surveyed. I would suggest it is quite unlikely that the non-executive security people agree with that. Risk insurance executives, senior executives, their job is probably to look at what's coming, not what's here now. Whereas the people on the ground are almost certainly dealing with 1,000,001 things that are mostly Jeff from accounting repeatedly using the word Jeff as his password,
Well, let's forget about the AI bit of that storyline for a second. And if you'd said to me that 80% of executives think that cyber is the biggest risk, then that's a positive story, right? So, has AI driven a spotlight onto cybersecurity? Are organizations going to take it more seriously? And
maybe. God, you're good at this positivity thing, I have to say.
I halfway through the recording, I decided to turn my attitude around. I'm trying to look for the silver lining now instead of. You
turned that frown upside down, and that's why you look a bit funny.
I have. You've cheered me up. Okay, well that's positive. I think the our view is pretty well documented, right? The AI assisted attacks are the top cyber threat is not really a productive takeaway, right? Because AI is just a tool. It's like saying computer, keyboard and mouse assisted attacks.
Keyboards and mice are used in a vast percentage of all cyber attacks, and thus should be banned.
Yeah, it's exactly that, isn't it? So that's kind of where we're at. I think
I've got a mental image now of someone using like a Amazon Alexa and just going like, hack the computer, Alexa, hack the computer. Anyway, that's all.
Do you think this podcast will be wheeled out now as a sign of our lack of clairvoyance and foresight when the kind of human computer interaction moves to Elon's chip in the brain, or keyboard and mice become obsolete?
Let's
and we didn't see it coming.
Let's not even go there.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think one of the back to the kind of the AI assisted bug bounty or the bug finder. There might be some people listening to this going, well, if the good guys could do it, the bad guys can do it and use AI. And I think that's probably again where there is some positive news, because broadly, and there are obviously exceptions to this, and there are quite a lot of ways that you can jailbreak, I suppose, any kind of prompt guardrails. But generally, large organizations and kind of legitimate organizations have access to powerful artificial intelligence, whereas malicious and malign actors may have to use readily available, publicly available AIs to do these kind of things. And there is kind of hope that there are security teams in-house for these models that are seeking to prevent those. So broadly, the accessibility for AI for good is better than the accessibility of AI for bad. So that's another one of Tim's positive spins on this, and and a rebuke to the preempted comments that, you know, if it can be used for good, it can also be used in the same way for bad.
Yeah, no, that is right. Yeah, it is more accessible for legitimate uses right now. So that's good. That is
right.
Good.
Let's not mention AI again for the rest of the podcast. Let's move on to hacktivism.
Well, hacktivism. So it's kind of an interesting one. I mean, it's interesting in being very typical and expected in some ways. So the UK made a statement reiterating support for Ukraine, and then got a bunch of DDoS attacks at local government websites, and Tottenham Hotspur Football Club website, apparently. Don't know what they did wrong, but there you go.
The manager's under a lot of pressure at the moment, but I don't think it comes as a result of the IT infrastructure.
No, probably not. No, and maybe the IT manager is under a lot of. Yeah. Then, so as well as that, so it appears that the DPRK have become indirectly involved in Ukraine, and shortly after they did, South Korean websites started to be targeted by Russian DDoS attacks. So both public and private entities in South Korea started experiencing pro-Russian hacktivist DDoS attacks, which, you know, just kind of does make me wonder, like, did North Korea ask Russia to do this, or did Russia just kind of throw it in as a freebie, you know, like, thanks for invading Ukraine with this, we'll DDoS a few websites for you?
Yeah, I feel like that's rather speculative. I think there is a probably
yes,
a large,
yes, it is
a large sense of autonomy on there. One does wonder, I guess, you know, kind of
just completely wonder
how do they decide to live their lives? These kind of hacktivist actors that target relatively inconsequential organizations on the large scale, but, you know, maybe people like us keeping them relevant. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, yeah. In other DDoSy news, so like Operation Power Off, I think it is, so international law enforcement operation, took down another platform. So this was dstat.cc was taken down, and it was kind of a comparison and rating service for DDoSes or DDoS services. So people could go and look at it and find whatever, you know, best price point and impact versus whatever type of software or server and so on. That was taken down. 2 people were arrested in Germany for running that, and also selling huge amounts of drugs online as well.
Oh yeah, I suppose when there's one cyber crime, there's usually other crimes as well on these actors.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's good to see. It's good to see more of that happening, because, you know, we really, you know, talk DDoS, and often now we just go straight to thinking, oh yeah, Russian hacktivist. But they make these financial incentives for people, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a siren.
Is that, sorry, just keep going. That's the this is my busy street. I'm outside, I'm afraid. I'm not in the office today.
Oh yeah. So while we have these Russian hacktivist groups, and that's where the mind goes to straight away when we say DDoS, they make it financially incentivized for other people to join their DDoS infrastructure. They pay botnet herders for doing attacks and things like this. And a lot of those are not necessarily in Russia. There are lots of other people doing DDoSes, from people wanting to DDoS games servers because it annoys them or whatever and so on. Yeah. There is a lot of this infrastructure and administrators floating around in the world who could get taken down.
Well, the law enforcement is doing a really good job, considering they're the kind of the only real mitigation we've got against this is a systemic risk. So as you mentioned, a lot of people DDoS, right? I mean, they are advertised as legitimate stressors. They're obviously not, but so you could stress test your own internet services, but gamers use it all the time to give themselves maybe an advantage on a server, on a game they're playing, or whatever. In fact, I mean, the kind of counter DDoS action has been going on by law enforcement for a number of years now, and there was a lot of success they had, a long time ago now, where they simply put a work with search engine providers to put up a kind of splash page to say, by the way, if you're planning on using the service for gaming or against game servers or whatever, then this is illegal. So that actually cut the use down an awful lot there. And it's good to see arrests. I think, unfortunately, though, and looking at the doom and gloomy perspective, is the sun has never shone so bright for the bot herders, right? And they are making hay. Like there is no shortage of cheap, imported, insecure kind of crappy little IoT devices, flying in from drop shippers all over the world and being put into networks. And there is no real shortage of opportunities for bot herders to infect these kind of Internet of Things devices, as they are quite often really inherently vulnerable. I know there are some initiatives by the kind of European Commission, for example, that look to kind of watermark responsibly, or kind of cyber responsible electronics. So there are some efforts to do to kind of curb this trend, but unfortunately, like I say, the sun has never shone brighter, and they are making hay, these DDoS bot herders.
Yep. But every one of these law enforcement actions, just hopefully will discourage people in some way from some part of that chain.
I would think as well, it's kind of worth noting that we talk about Tottenham Hotspur. Now, if you're an Arsenal fan listening to that, you might not particularly care so much that Tottenham Hotspur were targeted, but it's worth noting that a lot of DDoSes and a lot of these kind of capabilities were used to target Romania recently, as a result of a pretty kind of multifaceted and targeted operation against the country to support the electoral bid of a relative kind of a pro-Russian TikTok star, right? So these are being used in attacks that would materially impact the geopolitical landscape, which would kind of have, frankly, a knock-on effect on people's lives and their safety. So this is not just a local website going down for 10 minutes of your football team. These are being used in really impactful societal attacks.
Yes, real world impact going on there for sure. Speaking of real world impact, moving off the hacktivist front, really, I think moving off hacktivism, there was a cyber attack in the UK in November. I think it was in November, that temporarily disabled tracking systems on prison vans.
You'd better hope it was in November, Steve, because this is November's podcast.
Well, sometimes things are disclosed in months after they happened, for example.
I see.
I have to get a bit fuzzy sometimes on like the 31st of a month.
We'll take some liberties with our listeners and hope they forgive us.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
But yeah. So it was very interesting to me because so apparently tracking systems and panic alarms on prison vans just didn't work for a while, which this subcontractor decided was not a problem. That's fine. And seemingly it was fine. I'm not saying it wasn't, but yes. This happened in the month that the UK had a quite public trial of a suspected Iranian spy who had escaped from prison by hanging onto a van. And I found it quite interesting that we have a cyber attack, disabling tracking systems and panic alarms and things at the same time that was going on, because it really highlights a sort of, possible impact, real world impact.
Yeah. These kind of alarms and safety mechanisms on prison vans are there for the safety of society. So again, exactly. Undermines, really interesting.
Yeah, and obviously as well, we had 2 ransomware attacks on hospitals in the UK. So the Wirral Trust, University Trust Hospital, something like this, and Alder Hey Children's Hospital both had ransomware attacks against them.
Yeah, if another reminder was needed about kind of the immorality of these actors and the real world impact. Yeah. That's just the UK, and kind of we're noting those two because you and I are both kind of British citizens. But unfortunately, across Europe and across the US, there's been a lot more hospitals impacted recently as well. So
yeah. In Germany, there was a pharmacy kind of wholesaler, provider, whatever, supplies, I think, 6,000 pharmacies, AEP. And they had a ransomware attack that affected them so badly. Not only could they not receive emails, they couldn't receive phone calls.
yeah.
And pharmacy, not seemingly super exciting or dangerous sounding, but there's a lot of people who rely on pharmacies for, life maintaining and quality of life maintaining drugs and so on. So, yes, big impact from that.
But now we've got to end the podcast on that, Steve.
Okay, well,
is there a way that you could cheer us up after we've just talked about, or maybe is it poignant enough that that's what we need to leave our listeners with?
Well, I mean, it's pretty poignant. It seems pretty impactful, to be honest. Do we have something positive to finish on?
Did AI too soon, didn't we?
Did AI far too soon? God, just dropped it there, didn't I? Terrible. Good cyber things that happened.
Well, listen, maybe then we just... Oh, go on.
I have locked my wife out of the house and I'm wearing headphones. So I don't know how long she's been knocking, but I'll be right back.
Steve's wife's back in the house. You could have left her waiting for 30 more seconds and we could have wrapped up seamlessly, but now we just look like a bunch of amateurs.
Amateurs.
Is it even raining outside?
It is December, so probably.
All right, well, I'll leave it there. Happy holidays, everybody. It's not all bad news, we promise. We just can't think of any good news to end on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good news. It's nearly time for a lot of people to have some time off.
Yeah, and if you want my predictions for the Christmas period, the holidays period, it's going to be quiet. There's going to be no impactful cyber attacks at all. Don't worry about it. See you all in January.
There'll be almost nothing, and some random people on forums will claim they're making the biggest dump of credentials ever, and it'll turn out to be completely boring. There you go. Ignore it all. It's not important.
Yeah. Gone are the days where our Christmas weekends are ruined by solar winds at Log4j. I'm 99%.
There's no reason that's going to happen.
99% confident of that.
There's no reason that would happen again.
Yeah,
no, obviously.
Okay,
it's fine. Job done. Right then.
Thank you.
Later.
This podcast was brought to you by BSL IT, a proud with secure partner. For more information, visit bsl-it.com.